And good morning. Today is Wednesday, December 2nd. It is 11:04 a.m. And today we continue our author series. My name is Ryan Belmore. I'm the owner and editor, publisher, whatever role I may have today for What's Up Noop. And Frank Brosnitz joins me. And hello, Frank.
How you doing, Ryan?
I don't know what I do for a living anymore.
Well, these are strange times, aren't they?
They are. They are. You know, some days I'm ad salesman. I'm janitor. I'm a little bit of this and that.
Well, they're all good. They're all good.
Excellent. And we are continuing our author series today. Yesterday we had a great conversation, and we got a couple more authors lined up this week.
Well, today we have Jon Land. He is one of the most prolific authors in Rhode Island, with more than 50 books, more awards than I can think of, nationally and internationally. Most of his work's fiction, and some of it nonfiction, and all great raves. And on Friday, we'll have Dr. Barbara Roberts. She is the author of Dr. Broad, which is a nonfiction book about her rather interesting career, in which she was the first female cardiologist in Rhode Island, and she was also the cardiologist to the mob. So we'll hear about that. A true story, which sounds maybe more like fiction than a lot of the fiction stories we're talking about.
There we go, and we will bring John on now. And good morning, John.
How are you, Ryan? Hi, Frank.
How you doing, John?
I'm good. It's here we are in December. Hopefully we'll have a vaccine soon. We might, in our lifetimes, we might see the world come back to normal.
Yeah, I heard that one of the primary groups that would get it would be grocery workers. I've been out looking for a part-time job at a grocery store, but I don't know. We'll see. But I guess within a week they're going to start distributing the vaccine in England, and we shouldn't be far behind. Oh,
sounds good. And John, we're just going to ask you to start by listing all of your books in chronological order.
Well, how about alphabetical order?
You've written a lot of books when somebody will say, "I love that scene in ... and you have no recollection of writing it, or when you do something you do the same thing in another book, and someone says, this character appeared in another book, don't you?" And I go, "No."
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, your shadows of memory, I guess, that pop back in. Of course, you think that sometimes I'm repeating myself on books that sold very few copies, or not enough copies. So at least if I'm repeating myself, I should do a better job of choosing the material that
sometimes that second time around you do better. What was it? Grisham with A Time to Die was the book initially died, and then it was a huge success.
That's what I tell people about myself. If I'm preparing, my Oscar award speech and my Emmy award speech, and for when Caitlin Strong, knock on wood, makes it in TV, and I get to say I'm an overnight success after 30 years.
Yeah, there you go. So tell us a little bit about yourself, John. You're a I think it was a 1979 grad of Brown University.
Yeah.
And when did you start writing, and what was the motivation?
Well, I'm not like a lot of writers in the sense that I did not study to be a writer. I never took a writing class. For me, Brown, going to college after high school, I was sure about that, and I was also sure about going to law school after college. It was no doubt. It was no question in my mind. But when I got to Brown, I got bit by the writing bug. I got bit by I really found that I love to read. I always knew I liked it. I didn't realize I loved it. And to be a writer, the first thing you have to be is a reader. When people say, boy, what do I have to do to write? The first thing you tell them is, well, what do you like to read? And if they say I don't read, then they can't write. But I also fell in love, Frank, with the process of writing. Now, I loved the whole notion of being behind a computer, or in this case, in those days, a Smith Corona typewriter with a manual return.
I think I still have one of those.
You know what? It's a collector's item. Don't get rid of it. It's hard to fix. I was also fortunate enough to come under the influence of mentors. There's nothing more important for young people than finding people in their lives. And this is something we could talk about, and how COVID has disrupted the engagement of finding people you can have face-to-face, in-person engagement with, who believe in you and show an interest in you. And I had several professors like that, a whole bunch of professors like that at Brown. And before that, I had teachers at Barrington High School who were like that for me. I always craved that engagement. And I was encouraged to chase the dream of being a writer by the great Elmer Blistein, for example, who became one of my mentors, and the late George Montero, who we just lost last year, another great man, Roger Henkel, who we lost. You know, it's weird when the definition of getting older, I think, is when all the people who were important to you in college and high school are gone.
John, I want to ask you an off-the-wall question. So you went to Barrington High School.
I did.
Went to Brown University. Some people would say that's a pretty privileged background. I often worry when I think about kids coming out of impoverished neighborhoods where they don't have the same culture and the same privilege that a kid does coming out of Barrington, where books might be part of the household, where perhaps in Central Falls or South Providence, it's something you might find in a library.
You know, Frank, that is such a great point. No one's ever raised that with me before. And what it comes down to is you have desire and you have opportunity. I think what you're getting at is, there are so many young people who might desire to follow the path that I followed, but they might not, for lack of privilege, have that opportunity. Not everyone can go to Brown. Now, Stephen King has said that writing is the one profession that you don't choose, it chooses you. You get bit by a bug. You scratch, according to King, where it itches. The problem is there's a difference between doing something and doing it well enough, professionally enough, to make it a career. And what you're getting at is, it's chasing a dream is one thing, but fulfilling a dream requires knowing and having access to ways you can learn how to format a manuscript. You can be a great writer, but if you've never been taught how to format a manuscript properly, forget it. You might have this intuitive ability to write screenplays, like Quentin Tarantino, one of the great screenwriters of our time, who basically taught himself. But if you can't afford the software to put the screenplay in the form Hollywood wants it in, you could be the greatest. You could have the greatest imagination in the world. You could have the greatest sense of story in the world. But if you can't format it, if no one taught you, and if you can't afford the software Final Draft or some other version, then your opportunity. So you have the desire, but you don't have the opportunity. So I wish I had a solution for that, but there's no question in my mind, because I have volunteered at inner city schools in Providence, in addition to Barrington schools. And I can tell you the imagination of the kids I've worked with or know from a school like E-Cubed Academy off Branch Avenue on Vesey Street, where my fraternity kind of adopted that school. There are so many kids who have so much creativity at all levels. But those kids in Barrington, 98% of them are going to college, 95, whatever it is. At a school like E-Cubed, and they have a very high rate, it'll probably be about 60% that will go to college. Well, what about the other 40? You know, why aren't they, you know, what, again, desire and opportunity.
Is part of the answer, and then I want to get back to a lot of the writing piece, your writing piece. Is part of the answer actually having mentors in school when these kids are going through school, that somebody can recognize that potential talent and then help to shape that individual?
There is no question, and I think that starts at the middle school level, even the elementary school level, There's nothing more important for a kid, and I remember this distinctly, than when someone believes in them, who sits down and says, you're really good at this and you can go far. And then not only that, but I can help you go far. Or you seem like you really like this. Let's get together in can you come, when's your next study period? When's your next, can we meet after school? When teachers, and this is what I had the advantage of. I often tell people, Frank, that the teachers I had in high school in Barrington were as important to my development as a writer and as a person as the great professors I had in college. I had so many wonderful high school teachers, not just in English, by the way, but in social studies, in math, science, not so much. I was never so good at science. But so many, just someone who just knows your name, someone who will, who can explain why you got a B instead of an A, or what you can do better. Someone to take an interest in you. I'll give you a perfect example. I learned to write in high school with teachers like Cheryl Garadini and Larry DeSantos, writing and literature teachers. And I would write a paper and I would sit with them in a study hall, for an hour. And we would go over it paragraph by paragraph and talk about what we could have done, what I could have done better. That led to when I got to Brown, when I said before about the love of the process of writing. I wouldn't have been able to fall in love with the process of writing if it hadn't been for teachers like the two I mentioned and Chuck Rowland. There were so many more, Gary Edens. I could go on forever. Jim Urquhart, Marvis Ford, just this wonderful group of dedicated teachers. And I don't think teachers have changed at all. I think teachers still have that same dedication. And I think there are more opportunities out there for kids today in fields like mine, in fields like film, than there have ever been because of technology and digitalization and all that. So the opportunities are there. If you can find the right mentors at inner city schools, at suburban schools, anywhere, people who will help you move on to take the next step. In Barrington, right from the start, Peter Canarian, a wonderful guidance counselor, took such an interest in me. And I wasn't used to that. And I'll never forget the people who helped me along the way. And Frank, it makes me want to help other people. I believe in giving back. I believe in the whole process. Somebody did something for me. I want to do something for someone else.
Jon, did you start with short stories? And when was it that you wrote your first piece?
I wrote my first novel. I never had written a short story. I wrote my first novel as a senior thesis at Brown. In the words of Elmer Blistein, my mentor, you have all the abilities that Brown could never teach you. Episode, a sense of story, a sense of pacing, and none of the abilities Brown should have taught you: spelling, grammar, punctuation. The book was not good. It started off as a Hollywood novel, a la a fellow Brown alum named Nathaniel West, who wrote The Day of the Locust. And over the course of time in writing it, it became a thriller. I learned two things, Frank, two vital things from writing The Iconoclast as my senior thesis, which became, when I rewrote it, The Abaddon Factor. It was still hopeless. I learned two vital things. One, that I could finish a book. Two, that I was a thriller writer. Instinctively, intuitively, I was a thriller writer. And the first thing is even more important, because if you can't finish a book, you can't publish it. I can't tell you how many people say to me, I've started a book. I've started 10 different books. I've got 50 pages of each written. Well, if you had written 500 pages of the same book, you'd be finished now.
Right.
You didn't do that because, you don't. And when that same writer will say, well, so what do I do? What's the most important thing? And I say, you've got to be able to tell a story, beginning, middle, and end. It sounds so simple until you try to do it. It's like when you're watching a professional athlete, a tennis player, a football player. They make it look so easy. And then you try doing it. It's not so easy to break a 3 hour and 20-minute marathon. It's not easy to do the things other people are doing. But in the case of in my situation, my experience at Brown taught me that I could finish a book. And if you can finish a book, you can publish a book.
When you graduated Brown, did you immediately go into writing on a full-time basis?
I had a very supportive family, and they weren't thrilled that I wasn't going to law school, but there was some money that had been put aside, and they let me live on that money for a few years. Privilege again, admittedly, where I was able to make a living somewhat as a journalist, writing magazine articles for People, the Saturday Evening Post. I wrote one for the Rhode Islander when there was a Rhode Islander in the Providence Journal.
I remember it well.
It's just smaller. Doug Riggs edited my first piece for the Rhode Islander. Then he became my book review editor years later. It's interesting how that kind of thing cycles around. Sure. So I started off writing magazine articles. As I was writing my first year out of Brown, I wrote the book that would eventually be my first published novel, The Doomsday Spiral. Rejected by basically every publishing company in New York twice. And Frank, this is interesting. I wrote my first my first published novel at a time when you typed everything. There was no email. There was no fax. There was none of that stuff. You typed it all. In this case, again, on a slightly higher end Smith Corona typewriter, but still a Smith Corona typewriter, where I had to retype the book 2 or 3 times. But and sometimes rewriting the book that way became part of the process. So I wrote. And it was rejected by everybody basically twice until a small company that's now a much bigger company. It was then Zebra, now it's Kensington, took a chance on me. And that became, the book was sold in April of it was sold in 1981. It came out in 1983. And I haven't looked back since. But none of that ever would have happened if I hadn't written it, the first one, as a senior thesis. And I wrote the second one, the first one that got published. I wrote it in 3 weeks. I didn't have a lot of things going on in my life at that time. So I literally wrote 110,000 pages in maybe a little more than 3 weeks, maybe a month, because I knew if I stopped, I'd start to question myself. So I had to keep going. I had to get it done. Again, I had to finish it. And if you don't finish, you can't succeed.
What's your biggest challenge when you write? Is it the story idea? Is it character development? Is it dialogue? What are the things that are most daunting to you when you go into a book?
I am so I have my process, and none of those things are ever a problem for me, because I get out of the way and let the story tell itself. I don't get writer's block. I'm not a writer as much as I am a storyteller. You don't get storyteller's block. Your imagination never shuts off. So with me, I know the characters are going to get me where I need to go, both in fiction and nonfiction. I know that once I start fingers on the keyboard, it's all going to be there. The biggest challenge, Frank, is still, after all these years, the biggest challenge is still making a living. And in the new environment of publishing, I was always a creature of mass market paperback. Even in hardcover, my best sales, my biggest success was in mass market, in rack size paperback. That's who I was. Well, there are a lot less mass market paperbacks being published and being published successfully. So here it is. I feel at times like Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, that the world I grew up in publishing is not there anymore. It's a whole nother world. It's all new people. And I've I've been able to continue to survive and thrive at times by diversifying, moving into nonfiction, writing science fiction, partnering with Heather Graham, taking over. I was very fortunate. You know, luck is the residue of design, or fortune is the residue of design, as they say. One of the things that's really helped my career was taking over 2 legacy series, Murder, She Wrote and Capital Crimes. But you know what? I'd love to say I earned those, and in some ways I did. But I happened to have the agent who represented the writer who had been doing them before me, and he passed away. So they needed a replacement. And my agent suggested me for both of them. And those have been phenomenal opportunities. And here's the great thing about this career. I'm 63 years old, and I'm still getting new opportunities all the time. I'm still getting the kind of opportunities that in many professions would go to someone at 24, 25, someone who is hungry and passionate. That's the thing about how I do what I do. I'm more hungry, at least, or hungrier, and more and at least as passionate, if not more, than I've ever been. I'm still chasing, to some extent, the brass ring, or let me put it this way: maybe I've been able to grab a bunch of them, but I haven't grabbed the New York Times bestseller list. I haven't grabbed an adaptation of one of my books into a movie. The only movie I've ever made was based on a screenplay, and also diversification, learning how to write scripts. So basically, I think what we're talking about, and it's not just being a writer, to be successful at anything you do, especially in the creative arts, especially as a creative entrepreneur, as I call myself, or anyone who does this kind of thing, you have to never lose your passion. You've got to be as hungry and in love with what you're doing at 63 as you were at 23.
When you look at your nonfiction versus the fiction, does the nonfiction in any way parallel the kind of book you're writing for nonfiction, for fiction?
That's such a great point. And I would say it this way. When I'm doing narrative nonfiction, where I'm telling a story when I'm telling one person's story in a memoir, as I did in Betrayal, Guardian, and Chasing the Dragon, books like that, Takedown. The first thing I do is look for a narrative strand, a sense of story, beginning, middle, and end. To your point, exactly the same thing I do when I'm writing a novel, beginning, middle, and end. What's the narrative strand? The difference is this. When I write fiction, I'm trying to make my characters sound real and feel real. When I write nonfiction, I'm trying to make the subject of my story feel more like a fictional character, because my nonfiction is very dialogue rich. So there's a lot of people talking, just like there is in my books, in my fictional books. So the same rules apply. The problem with nonfiction for me is that you're a prisoner of reality. You're a prisoner of truth. You can't change what happened. You can't really embellish too much what happened. You have to tell the truth. I don't like to be bound by the truth. I like to make it up.
John, I'm going to ask the $1 million question here. I ask the questions around here that make money.
Wow.
Best places for people to go to get your books. We'll take a quick intermission. Where can people go and get your books? Favorite bookstores in Rhode Island? Places where people can get your stuff.
You know what? Rhode Island is blessed by having some phenomenal independent bookstores. Barrington Books Retold in Cranston, Barrington Books in Barrington. Wonderful Wayland Square Books on the east side, right around the corner from me, just a few maybe a mile away, half mile, whatever it is. Wakefield Books down in Wakefield. Those are just 4, and there are a lot of others. But I would also say that the Barnes & Noble in Smithfield and the Barnes & Noble in Warwick, they're terrific too. And I got to tell you, I miss the Waldens. I really miss the Waldens. You can get my books at any of those stores, but you can also get them on Amazon. On Amazon, pretty much anything Anywhere you buy books, you can get my books.
Frank, you may resume.
Thank you so much. So I was going to make an observation when you talk about with nonfiction that you're confined by the reality. I'm in love with historical fiction where you're not, and you can take that piece of history and you can, and I often say this, you get into the soul of a society. So I can read about the Biafran War, Half a Yellow Sun. I don't know if you ever read that book. It's an incredible book about the Biafran War, and you trace this Igbo tribe family from their very prosperous days in Nigeria to when the war started, and the Igbo tribesmen fled Nigeria into what they developed as Biafra. But now you're following this family, and you're seeing all of the emotions and all of these things from this fictional family. But all of the history in it is absolutely correct. So that seems to be a terrific way to be able to overcome those confines.
It is, and in fact, I'm not a historical novelist. I don't do historical fiction, but in my Caitlin Strong Texas Ranger books, which are the series I have going now, my most successful series ever, Caitlin is a 5th generation Texas Ranger. She's a female Texas Ranger. And there's always a historical thread, a historical subplot, a historical flashback sequence that is intercut with the present stuff, the things happening in the present, with one of her ancestors, one of the other Texas Rangers in the Strong family, her father, her grandfather, her great-grandfather, her great-great-grandfather. And somehow something they were doing, one of their cases, one of their investigations in the past is directly correlated with Caitlin's case in the present. I'll give you an example. In Strong to the Bone, I was going to do in the present subplot, neo-Nazis were going to be the bad guys. So I wanted to see if there was any history of Nazis in the state of Texas. As a historical fiction fanatic, you're going to really like this. So I Googled, the greatest tool for a writer, Google, right? I Googled Nazis in Texas. That's it. I got all these hits about prisoner of war camps, Nazi prisoner of war camps in Texas during World War II. 123,000 German POWs were kept in Texas in POW camps from 1943 to the end of the war. I had no idea those things existed. I didn't know. So I was able to build an entire subplot around Caitlin's grandfather, Earl Strong, first being at odds with and then joining forces with J. Edgar Hoover on a plot that emerges from one of these Nazi POW camps. Now that was a few books ago. Strong. That was Strong to the Bone. In my latest Caitlin Strong book, Strong from the Heart, Caitlin's great-grandfather, William Ray Strong, joins forces with Pancho Villa on this goes exactly to your question. I've written books. I had written 10 books about my female Texas Ranger, and so many of them dealt with drugs and the Mexican border and the Rio Grande. But I never asked myself, how did the Mexican drug trade start? Historically, how did it all begin? Where do these cartels come from? It turns out, and I found this out in research again, history, Chinese immigrants to Mexico in the 1860s and 1870s brought opium seeds, poppy seeds with them. And they were going to grow because China was the opium capital of the world. All these immigrants brought seeds with them, and they turned Mexico into the opium heroin capital of the world. The first cartels in Mexico were actually run by Chinese immigrants who took Mexican name. Felipe Wong is the villain in the past in Strong from the Heart. Felipe Wong is a real person. He ran a section of Mexico's drug trade, and he had the largest poppy fields arguably in history back in the Mexican and Mexico's climate is ideal for growing heroin, growing poppies, growing opium. So the question of history, I think I really live by the quote. I'm sure you're going to know what I'm going to say. William Faulkner, the past isn't gone. It's not even past. It's so true. There's such a connection, an indelible connection between the past and the present. And in fact, that's probably my favorite feature of the Caitlin Strong novels.
I think we sometimes dismiss the past when in fact we can learn a great deal from it and take a lot of the wisdom from the past and use it in the present. When you wrote your first Caitlin Strong novel, did you have in mind that would become a series?
Yes, and the reason for that was Caitlin Strong was not born out of my creative inspiration. She was born at a marketing meeting at my publisher after the series I was working on at the time had kind of petered out, and we had a meeting with marketing and sales and my friend and my publisher Tom Doherty. What should I be doing now? What should I be doing that would be commercially viable and commercially successful? The head of paperback sales, Tom Espenschied, said, thrillers are the most popular genre, and women buy 3/4 of all books. But there are no female action heroes, a la Jack Reacher, a la James Bond. There are no female Navy SEALs. There are no. Is there a way you could write a female action hero, not a female detective, a female action hero? Well, Frank, it's challenging because many action heroes in literature come from the military, come from special forces. Women can be in the special forces. They cannot serve in combat as a Green Beret or as a Navy SEAL or as a Delta Force commando or as in Marine Force Recon. So I said, what about a female Texas Ranger? Because I've always loved Westerns. And in fact, Westerns, the structure of Westerns is basically the identical structure as thrillers. Quest stories. Shane, the lone gunman, the loner coming out of the range, the man who cannot live among other men, the frontier hero. So I knew in that meeting that Caitlin Strong, there would be a series of books about Caitlin Strong. I knew it right then. It was almost like it's like when you meet someone for the first time and you're gonna be friends with them your entire life. That's how I felt about that first meeting when we came up with the concept for what became the Caitlin Strong novels.
Do you prefer to write, and I presume that I know the answer to this, series versus standalone novels?
That's a great question. And I'm about to do a standalone novel for the first time in a very long time. But of course, if it does really well, I'll find a way to make it a series. Because too many times there's this separation between the creative and the business. The creative's on one side, the business is on the other. But that shouldn't be true. Creative and business are like this. They're joined. And sometimes the greatest decisions you make creatively, the greatest creative inspiration you get is as a result of needing to pay the mortgage or as a result of something in business. So if someone says to me, wow, if you write a sequel to this book, I'll pay you this much. If you want to do a standalone, I'll pay you half as much. Which one am I going to do? I'm not going to chase the money because I'm going to write just as good a book. The Caitlin Strong novels, there are 11 in the series, but each one is its own world unto itself. Each one is its own individual story, its own individual book. They jump off each other, they play off each other. Sure, it's a series, but they're all independent of each other in the stories they're telling. The villains never come back. Occasionally, I'll pop someone else back in later. So I think you can have it both ways in that case. If you make your series novels feel like standalones, that a reader can pick up any book. This is the mark of a great series. Not saying that I'd write a great series, but this is the mark of someone who does. Is to be able to pick up any book in any order be hooked and not think you missed anything. And I got to tell you, every series I've ever discovered, with the exception of James Bond, I have picked up in the middle. Dave Roby Show, James Lee Burke, Lee Child's great Jack Reacher character, Spencer by the late Robert Parker, Thorne, James W. Hall. You name the book. Harry Bosch, most recently, from Michael Connolly. I didn't start at the beginning. I picked up Harry Bosch 20 books in, and now I'm upset. Now I'm hooked on.
Yeah, I've read a few of those.
They're so simple, and yet they're seductive. You can't stop reading them. So it's standalone series to me. You know, you're right. Standalones within a series.
John, I have just a couple more questions, 3 actually, and then see what Ryan has. But we've been keeping you on for a while. Your favorite author?
Stephen King.
Okay, that was easy.
And the reason is he's been at it for so long. He wrote the books among other. There are other too, but there was, good. Victor Hugo once wrote, "Good writers borrow, great writers steal." I have stolen more from Stephen King, especially early in my career, than any other writer. And here's why, though. Here's why I put him at the top of the list for me. For 5, 6, 7 books at a time, I just couldn't read any of them. But then I rediscovered him because he was the best. I think he went down and then he came right back up again. And he started writing other things. He wrote Mr. Mercedes, which was a mystery. He won the Edgar Award. A horror writer won the Edgar Award for Mr. Mercedes. And then he wrote a sequel to The Shining called Dr. Sleep. I didn't think books could scare me anymore, Frank. I thought I was too old, too jaded, too mature. Dr. Sleep gave me nightmares. And here's the thing. Stephen King made me feel like a kid again. He made me feel at the age of 60 or whatever I was when I read Dr. Sleep, the exact same way I felt when I read The Shining, the prequel to the Dr. Sleep, when I was 20. That's a remarkable thing to do. It's why I can remember when Game of Thrones was in its last season, and a bunch of guys at the gym are talking about dragons and talking about how is Jon Snow going to survive? How is, Khaleesi going to defeat, the evil empire? And the reason we're able to do that is because the greatest gift entertainment can give us as adults is to be made to feel like kids again. Tell me a story, Dad. Tell me a story, Grandpa. Our imaginations don't age. We're still the same kid inside. I write to that kid in you. And the writers I respond to, like Stephen King, like David Morrell, like Clive Cussler, like the late Robert Ludlum, I could go on forever. They make me feel like they talk to my imagination. They make me feel the same way I felt as a kid reading.
If somebody wanted to start with your books, what would be the first one you would suggest for them to read?
I always tell people start with the latest because I like to think I get better in a lot of ways with each book. And also the latest one is the easiest to get, because older books you can only get digitally or used bookstores. They're out of print. I don't read digitally, Frank. I like to have a book in my hands. I like holding it. I like the process. So you can get all my Caitlin Strong books are still available in print. But I say, if you want any writer, read their latest work. And then if you enjoy that, go back to the other ones. And I even have another test I tell people to do. Because when people say, how do I know if I'll like your books or not? We're in tough times right now. $30 is a lot of money to spend for a book. $25 is a lot of money to spend for a book. 20 is too. I tell them to take the Land test, not just with my books, but any books. If you want to know whether a book is for you or not, pick it up and open it at random to any page and read that page. If that page grabs you, you will like that book. If it doesn't, move to another.
Another book or another page? No, I'm only
Another book. You get one page. You get one shot. That's it. One page. And I tell people, if you don't like the page you picked in the Caitlin Strong book, I'm not for you. But if you do, I am.
Two more questions. I'll ask them in the order I'm thinking of them. In this time when we have a lot of people who are in their homes, not by choice, but because of what's happening out here in the real world, has that been a benefit to reading, to writers, and the fact that now people should have more time to do that?
Well, I first of all, I tell people I've been practicing for social distancing for 40 years now. And
how are you doing?
I've been, you know what? It's the same. I'm almost humbled to say that it's hard to humble me, but I'm humbled to say that it hasn't changed my life very much. It has been good for the book business. More books have sold online. People are stuck. One of the things I don't understand: liquor stores are essential.
I get that.
Weed dispensaries are essential, right? Bookstores are not essential. What? Come on. Bookstores should never have been closed because, first of all, there's usually not a lot of traffic in them, and they work on such a small markup, a small margin. So I think that a lot of people have discovered reading. There's only so many TV shows you can stream before you get burned out on TV. So I think it has been good in that respect. I think it's probably one of the highlights of COVID, if you want to call it that more people have read, more people are reading, more people are discovering new authors. I hope I'm one of them. And is there a better form of entertainment than reading when for $6.99, $4.99, $5.99, you get not only 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever long the book is, of entertainment, but you get entertainment that takes you away from it spirits you away from all the craziness, it distracts you. When you're reading that book and you're in that world, you're not in the COVID world. You're in the author's world.
Yeah. John, I have one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan for whatever he has. But
chomping at the bit, I can tell.
Yeah, there he is. My question is that kid in 10th grade who says, I want to be a writer. What should that kid do? What should be the first thing that kid should do, and how can they develop their try to reach their dream?
Well, I think the first thing is they should be writing, and they should be looking for the kind of mentors that can help them get better. They're English teachers, any teacher, it might be someone, but you have to do it. You have to. Writers write. But the other thing I tell young people is find a way. Don't just do it. Try to publish it. Find journals online that specialize in young people, in young adult writers. Find even public. There used to be like one or two. There was, I forgot. I don't even remember what they were, but there were like 2 magazines that published stories by young kids. Now there are dozens, even hundreds online that do. Because I can tell you that in addition to having great mentors at Brown, something else happened at Brown that made me. I knew I had to be a writer. I fell in love with seeing my name in print. I fell in love. I wrote my first article for People Magazine. The first published article. I was a junior at Brown University, 1978, January. And my first article came out in People Magazine. There wasn't one word left in the article that I wrote. They had rewritten everything. They had taken what I sent them and they had rewritten everything. But the only 2 words they left alone were JON space Land. And from that day forward, when I said it got a little bigger with the Saturday Evening Post, and it was almost a cover story on Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. I love, from whether it be the first book I ever published or now I'm waiting for the 53rd, 54th. I can't even think anymore. I got 4 books coming out in the next few months, 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction. Sorry, 1 just came out, so I'm already ahead of the game. No matter how many books I do, the first time I open that box when it arrives and look and see the finished book with my name, I still get that same rush. I still have that same magic. And I think as long as I have that magic, I've got no, I think I'll keep doing what I'm doing.
Frank, and we need to get Brown University to sponsor this series, because for the second day in a row, we've had an author that is graduated from Brown.
Yeah, so. You got it. I have to say this, John. Your enthusiasm, and it just makes me want to read what you write, and I appreciate that.
You know what? It's interesting because a lot of people who read me, a number of people, I shouldn't say a lot, they've said the same what you just said, that the energy, my books are very fast paced. They don't stop, and they kind of mirror the way I talk. But even though I kind of ramble, I always try to remember what it is. I'm trying to make a point. I'm even now telling a story, a beginning, middle, and end, to the answers to your questions. So the fact that people can hear my voice when they read my books, I think that's interesting. But I tell them it's not me, it's the characters. I get out of the way and I let the story take over. The story knows where it wants to go. The most important thing the writer needs to do is step aside and let the story be the story.
Speaking of the story going where it wants to go, is it going to go on the big screen with Caitlin Strong in a movie, or is it going to be a limited series on Netflix?
I don't know if it'll be on Netflix, and I don't like to talk prematurely about stuff, but I will say that Caitlin's is in a really good place right now. Have me back on in a few months, and I'll tell you more. I'm knocking on wood even now. I don't want to give myself the Kenahara, the jinx, by saying anything. But a lot of success in entertainment is not what you create, but who you hook up with. And the material is the same. I've had the same. I think my material has always been cinematic. But after a lot of years, I finally found the right team. I found a team that knows how to play the game. And one thing about this business, Ryan, is there are no lone wolves in Hollywood. Hollywood is the ultimate collaborative effort. And I have been around and I have worked with too many lone wolf producers who throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. They don't have a plan. I finally hooked up with a group that has a plan. And we have a script, we have a Bible, and nobody ever pushed me to do that before. I wrote the pilot for Caitlin Strong. I did the series Bible for Caitlin Strong. The showrunner, knock on wood, that we have, wants to work with me, but her vision is me writing potentially writing every episode myself, unless we go broadcast. I don't know if I'm capable of writing 24. Although Sterling Silliphant, the Academy Award-winning writer, wrote every single episode of Route 66 for the first 2 seasons by himself. So if Sterling Silliphant can do it on Route 66, maybe I could do it too.
Yep, you probably can.
I'm gonna give it my all. And in this business, Frank and Ryan, the answer is yes. What was the question?
Yeah. To be clear, I had no indication that there was anything in the works. It just, the way you explain the entire book series, it sounds like it would be perfect for that.
Well, timing is everything. And when I write a book, I write a book. It's in a box. I'm in a box here. But when you do a film, when you do TV or you do a film, you spend TV, for example, which I know a world I know a little better now. You need the right production team, the producers, the EPs, the executive producers, who are going to attach a showrunner, which is nearly impossible to attach a showrunner to a show that's not already on the air. It's like money. If you need it, you can't get it. And if you have it, you don't need it. So how do you get a showrunner? Well, and then the showrunner has to get a star. And then you've got to find a network, and then you've got to get a director. At any point, any of those pieces could fall apart. You could have everything put together, and then your star leaves or doesn't. You have a star, but the network won't pay her or him won't pay her or pay. So now you don't have a star anymore. So what do you do? There's a lot of moving pieces, but the most important thing is a team, and that's what I've discovered, and that's what I found.
Excellent. Well, we will catch up with you again in a couple months when you have more news to share.
Knock wood. I'm just going to keep knocking wood because I've never been this far before, but I've also never had so much the right people, but also now the right material. We're not just throwing a book at the wall here. We're not just saying to the network, this is the greatest book greatest book series in the world. This is a wonderful character. We're saying, here's the pilot. Here's the next 4 seasons. Here's the first 12 episode summaries of each. And they hate to read. So it's very easy. The less I write, the better. It's like they only want a paragraph when I thought a page or even more would have been necessary. So I'm thrilled with that. And just remember, it just doesn't happen in a box. It happens because you find the right people who are around you and believe in what you're doing. And by the way, that's the theme of this. We started by beginning, middle, and end. We started by talking about people who believed in me when I was in high school and college. Now we're talking about people who believe in the characters I've created. They believe in me, but I'm secondary to the material. When you're trying to adapt it, you don't matter. The material matters. So it's the same story. It's just dressed up in a different wrapping. It's dressed up in a different bow. But it's still about finding people who believe in you and what you're doing. Do that, and that's the recipe for success as a writer.
Well, is that a great place to conclude? Jon, thank you very much. This has been fascinating.
I had a blast. I love the 3-way. I hope the lighting was okay. I didn't have a chance to adjust it to get it where I wanted. I think we're okay now. Hopefully you can making me look good on screen. I've got a face made for radio. I've got a face made for book flaps.
There you go.
I belong on book flaps. I don't belong on somebody's computer screen. But that's why they keep these things to less than an hour.
This was very good.
All right, Jon. Well, thank you very much. Best of luck, and we'll talk to you in the new year.
Absolutely. Might be big news. Stay in touch.
All right, we will.
Stay in touch. Maybe we can do a show. Maybe we can do a show. We'll bring a star on. We'll bring the showrunner.
There you go.
Before we, but we'll talk about Caitlin Strong. We'll bring a producer on. So we'll go from there.
Excellent. All right. And people can follow along at jonlandbooks.com. And we thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you, Jon.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you for coming on.
And Mr. Prosnitz. And that wraps up this conversation. And what a great conversation we had with Jon. Again, jonlandbooks.com. You can find out more about all of his books, everything we discussed. And I think we could have chatted for another 12 hours.
I think, he had such energy, but I thought some just great information, lots of stuff that I thought about for young writers and just about his career. Very likable individual. And you're right. We could have gone on for 12 hours.
That's it. And hopefully people, we are talking about authors and, this is the year. We mentioned shop local during this time of the year, every year, but certainly with this being a COVID-19 year, this is the year to go and support a mom and pop bookstore. Call them. They probably do contactless pickup. They probably do delivery. Give them a shot before you do it quickly on your phone within 30 seconds. and give a mom and pop a shop because they could certainly use it this year.
Yeah, there are a number of these that I know will do curbside pickup. So they'll be very accommodating to you. And I love the idea also, if you have the opportunity to walk into these independent bookstores and just browse around. Just even looking at titles can I kind of stir up your own creative juices.
All right, sir. Well, we appreciate it, and we will be back with our next author on Friday, and we will chat with you then, if not before, Mr. Prosnitz.
Very good. Thank you, Ryan.
On behalf of Frank Prosnitz, as well as myself and all of us here at What's Up Noop, we want to thank Jon Land for joining us today. And again, jonlandbooks.com. You can find out more about all of his books and much more. He has a live blog on there, and you can get in touch with him and a lot of other things. jonlandbooks.com. Great conversation today. We will chat with you next time.